What's up? Brian Tong here, and we have heard so much about the upcoming iPhone 14 and 14 Pro, but this year, we're expecting real distinct differences between them based on the rumors and reports. So this video is putting it all out there. I'm gonna lay out all the differences between the iPhone 14 versus the iPhone 14 Pro for you all. Okay, now first things first, there will be a 14 and a 14 Max, and a 14 Pro and a 14 Pro Max, and they will measure 6.1 inches and 6.7 inches. Now this will be the first time that we've ever seen a 6.7 inch non-Pro iPhone with the iPhone 14 Max. Also, say goodbye to the Mini. Cheer. Now for the iPhone 14 lineup, the flat edge, flat body design looks to remain the same, and it will also still have the same notch. On the 14 Pro models, it will still have a similar physical design, but the notch will go bye-bye, and it's getting replaced with a pill-shaped hole and hole punch cutouts for the camera and Face ID. Now, it will serve the same purpose, except it won't be a notch, and if you turn it sideways, it will look like the letter I in iPhone, because that's Pro. Now, the iPhone 14 lineup will still have a Super Retina XDR OLED display, but no ProMotion refresh rate at 120 Hz. The iPhone 14 Pro models are expected to bring an all-new Super Retina XDR OLED display, and display analyst Ross Young claims that the new 14 Pro displays will be more advanced and have refresh rates ranging from 120 Hz to as low as 1 Hz. That's compared to the iPhone 13 Pro, which had 120 Hz to as low as 10 Hz. So going as low as 1 Hz is going to help improve energy efficiency for the new iPhone. But this will also reportedly let Apple finally unlock the long-rumored always-on display feature specifically for the iPhone 14 Pro. Now, 9to5Mac recently discovered the latest iOS 16 betas have a new sleep state to the default wallpaper in iOS, so it's a darker and more tinted version that would work better for an always-on display mode. Now, this demo, it isn't an actual official feature in action, but this concept gives you an idea of how it might look, and it's a similar take to what we've seen from the always-on display for the Apple Watch. And the thinking is that you're gonna still be able to see your iPhone wallpaper, you'll see the widgets and information when your display isn't active. So an improved display and the always-on display feature is expected to be specific to the iPhone 14 Pro, because that is so Pro. All right, under the hood, reports say that the iPhone 14 lineup will still use the A15 chip from last year's iPhone 13, and the reality is that it's more than enough power for most people on their phones today, like 99.99%, but we know someone is gonna make a huge deal about it, put out a video because YouTube. But the iPhone 14 Pro models are expected to use the next generation faster A16 Bionic chip that's built on the same 5nm process as the A15 Bionic, with an expected 6-core CPU and at least a 5-core GPU. Now, reports believe all versions of the iPhone 14 family will have 6 gigs of RAM, but a recent report from DigiTimes claims that the iPhone 14 Pro will have a newer and faster type of memory. The iPhone 14 Pro and 14 Pro Max are expected to feature LPDDR5 RAM for the first time in an iPhone. It will bring an increase in memory bandwidth, and it will perform faster, while the regular 14 and 14 Max are expected to have the same LPDDR4 RAM as the iPhone 13 lineup. So we've got faster RAM on the 14 Pro, we've got a faster processor on the 14 Pro, and different reports claim that we could see a roughly 15% increase in CPU performance and 25 to 30% faster graphics performance. But here, right, will most people feel it day to day? Probably not. And Apple never, and I mean never, historically talks publicly about how much memory is in the iPhone. But if they're really trying to sell us on what's the difference between an iPhone 14 and an iPhone 14 Pro, they might make it a point to tell us this year. But I can only guess that this extra juice and power in the Pro line are the baseline specs for an iPhone that will maybe eventually support its rumored AR/VR headset that we could potentially see in early 2023. Now, the iPhone 14 Pro is also rumored to have a new vapor chamber thermal system to keep the iPhone 14 Pro cooler and performing at its highest level. We've already seen similar cooling systems like this in Samsung phones, Razer phones, and more, but reports say it could be coming to the 14 Pro for the first time. Now, the standard iPhone 14 will not get this new cooling system. The cameras. Obviously, our phones are cameras, and they're also expected to get upgrades across the lineup this year, but there will be differences. Now, the new iPhone 14, that's expected to get an improved ultra-wide camera for those super wide shots. It can be used for macro shots with better low light performance. Plus, you're gonna get an upgraded front-facing camera with a wider f1.9 aperture, better low-light performance, and autofocus capabilities. Now, its main camera, the wide camera, is expected to remain a 12-megapixel camera, and that's not a bad thing at all. I mean, come on, let's be real, it is still great. But the iPhone 14 Pro models, they're gonna get the same improvements in the ultra-wide camera and the front-facing camera. It will also get a new 7-element telephoto lens that will bring better image quality, but it's also still gonna have its weaker 3x optical zoom compared to a lot of the competition. But it's expected to also get an all-new 48 megapixel wide camera with a 21% larger sensor that will support higher resolutions, have better low light and autofocus performance, and bring native 8K video recording to the iPhone for the first time. Now, along with that larger sensor, the 14 Pro phones will have an even larger rear camera bump that makes it even thicker with an increased lens size. So it goes from thick with 2 Cs on the 13 Pro to thick with 5 Cs on the 14 Pro. That's thick. Now, as a content creator, the camera system will make a difference for me, but for someone like my mom, it's not gonna change how she uses her phone much. Oh, also, hi mama. Now, the entire iPhone 14 lineup, that's both the 14 and 14 Pros, are expected to get an upgraded Snapdragon X65 10 gigabit 5G modem and Wi-Fi 6E for the first time. There's no word on Bluetooth 5.2 or greater support yet because the previous 13 family has Bluetooth 5.1. And the entire lineup will still have a Lightning port. Yes, there is no expectation that we're gonna see USB-C here still. And, you know, that's a sad apple. Aww. But hey, wait for 2023 for USB-C in 2023 because that's the year that it rhymes. Now, color options are always important, and the iPhone 14 will reportedly come in an all-new purple color alongside black, white, red, and blue. Let's jump over to the 14 Pro. That will come in the standard graphite, gold, and silver, but long rumored, everyone's talking about a new purple option for the Pro as well, and that thing was made for me, but you got Alpine Green, Sierra Blue. Those look to be on the outs this year, potentially. Now, 2 other differences. The iPhone 14 Pro lineup could potentially offer a new 2 terabyte storage option for the very first time. You got even higher resolution photos and 8K video. It almost demands that if that's what you care about, especially if any of you have seen how huge those ProRes video files are. Sheesh. Now, the iPhone 14 is expected to start at the same $799 price point, but a report claims that the new iPhone 14 Pro could have a higher starting price, anywhere from 10 to 15% higher than its previous $999 starting price point. So we could possibly see an iPhone 14 Pro start at around $1,099 instead of $999 this year, because that's even more pro. So when you put it all together, because I just went through so many of these key differences, I'm gonna put it all in a nice little chart here that will be helpful if you know how to read words. And there's almost differences between the 14 and 14 Pro at every spec and comparison point this year. Apple looks to really finally be separating the 14 from the 14 Pro significantly, instead of just making it the one with a bigger display and a slightly better camera, if all of this holds true. But when I look at it, you know, the iPhone 14, that feels kind of really more like a 13S year, while the 14 Pro feels like incremental, but still significant enough when you add all the changes across the board. Sounds weird, incremental and significant. I think both can be true, but people making the upgrade here will be motivated by that camera. But ultimately, we're also gonna see how people react to a potentially more expensive iPhone in a tighter year economically. Now, is the 14 and the 14 Pro a game changer? No, but let's be real, what phone really is at this point? So we're gonna wait for Apple's official words sometime in September at their next event, which Bloomberg's Mark Gurman says they've been already shooting and is expected to be a virtual event this year as well. But there you go, all the differences between the iPhone 14 and the iPhone 14 Pro that we have heard so far. All right, that's gonna do it for this video. If you like what you see, you know what to do. Give me that thumbs up, and hit that notification bell, ding, to get all my latest videos when they drop. And if you want more of that Apple goodness, you can check out my weekly Apple Bits XL audio podcast to get the latest deep dive with all these stories and new ones every week with special guests. Thanks again so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you on the next video. Peace and love.